And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 64. Tonight, Doctor Who and the Androids of Moniaive Comic Festival. Yeah, so quite a bit of fun this evening. If I just flick this over here, the picture we're going to be talking about tonight, I'm going to talk about this photo shoot I did at Moniaive Comic Festival about 3 years ago. It was the third of the comic festivals in a row where I teamed up with hairdresser Ralph Yates Lee of B20 hairdressing salon in Dumfries. We've worked together on many occasions. So I'm going to talk about this particular photo and what was behind it, some of the decisions made, and also I'll take you through some of the editing processes I did for this as well. Also coming up tonight, in the critique section, Vandana has been playing around with an image of a swan and is looking for some feedback on that. Doriana has been out taking photos of sunsets and then playing with the editing a little bit and is looking for some ideas and feedback there. And Robert is on his quest to take a photo of his car with a reflection and then flipping the image and getting something interesting out of it. So those are the things we're going to be looking at this evening. In the meantime, here we are live on Facebook. So let me know you're here, leave a comment, say hello, particularly if this is your first time along. Let me know where you're coming from as well. It's always wonderful to know where in the world people are tuning in from, whether that's from just a few yards down the road to the other side of the world. We have quite a few people stretched across the globe, typically from America to India. So if you fall in within that zone or even out with it, then do let me know. What else? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, and if you find these podcasts interesting, useful, entertaining, and you would just like to support them in some kind of ways, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place you can do it. And you can also tell your friends, invite them along as well. So that's us. I can see that there's some comments coming in already. Roy says hi all from West Yorkshire. Stacey says good afternoon to all. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Jim says hi from a sunny Dumfries. Brian says hi all, good to be with you after a week away visiting family up north. Pat says hi everybody from deepest Somerset. And Stacey says it was hot and sunny, now it's rainy and humid. That's in Pennsylvania. And Sandra is saying hi from a sunny Birmingham in England. So that's great. We've got excuse me, got a few people in already. Some of you may have seen. For those of you who didn't, I just wanted to say it was Father's Day in the UK on Sunday just past, and my daughter got me a mug, which I particularly wanted to show off. I did put it up on my Facebook feed, but of course not everybody's seen it. But this is it, and essentially it says, "Warning, may start talking about photography." And I thought, well, you cannot get a more apt mug than that for somebody who's doing a weekly podcast on photography. So many thanks to my daughter Meg for that one. I thought that was rather amusing. Right, okay. So let's make a start. So what I want to talk about first of all is Moniaive Comic Festival. So the comic festival originally started, they did a whole series of them, probably about 17, 18 years ago. And so Moniaive is this tiny village nestled in the hills in southwest Scotland. And you would kind of have to search to find it on a map. You could drive past it without realising. And yet it's also been dubbed by some newspapers as the coolest village in Scotland. All sorts of little festivals and events and happenings going on there all the time. One of which has been the Comic Festival. Now it ran for several years, then it had a bit of a break, and then a few years ago it ran again for 3 years. And essentially, it was founded by Sue and Alan Grant. Now, Alan Grant is, in the comics world, is a legend, really. He's a legend comic book writer. He's done so much in the way of Batman, Judge Dredd. He was a joint writer with John Wagner on all the Judge Dredd and a whole load of 2000 AD comics. He Lobo. There's if you're into comic books, then you would know the name Alan Grant. Just anyway, he lives there. He and his wife set up the comic festival and essentially invited their friends along, all the friends that they've got in the industry, comic book writers and illustrators. And so each year the festival would be held, and it wasn't like one of these sort of, there were people who went there, some of these top name writers and illustrators, who they wouldn't go off to things like San Francisco Comic Con, where, you know, these sort of giant places where they would be invited to, but they'd turn up to a little village in southwest Scotland because their mate Alan asked them to. And it was wonderful. You could go along, and you're not separated in vast halls and by security guards and everything. You just wander up and have a chat with people. It's very warm and local and friendly and a lot of fun. Now, at the time, also living in Moniaive was Ralph Yates Lee, who, like I said, a hairdresser who I've worked with on several occasions, and in this case also his first in command, Trey Corbett, stylist, hairdresser. And essentially what had happened is over a span of 3 years, we sort of got involved with the comic festival. The first year, Ralph had this idea of just creating a few characters, which I did made up to these characters. I did a photo shoot with them, and we opened that photo shoot up so anybody could kind of come in and sort of see what was going on. And some of the artists actually came in and started drawing the models. That was kind of fun. I talked about that about a year ago, I think, going back in the previous episodes. Then we did another one where a little comic strip was made, a little 6-panel comic strip made out of the characters that were created. And then this one, what happened was Ralph had come up with the idea that what he wanted to do was create a series of models that looked like androids but had sort of slightly way out makeup and hairstyles. Based on these characters, then, Alan Grant wrote a little 16-page comic book. And the idea was that you would then get different people to illustrate different panels. And some of these panels were done by top comic book artists. Some of them were done by local school children, other members of the village. But they also needed a cover. So here's the book. Here's the little comic book. And to sort of show you that. So the story was there. Different panels were created by different artists. And I was doing the cover for the thing. Actually, I'll tell you what I will do now. I think what I will do is I will show you a little video that I created. It's only 1 minute long or thereabouts. If I just pause that, drag that over onto this screen, and then flip back here, and I'll just show you. This was a little kind of making of video. And so you can see here that this is the wee village of Moniaive. There's me having a cup of tea, getting prepared. There's Ralph cutting hair, makeup being done, discussions going on. We created a couple of images for the inside as well. Here we're lining up our androids ready to head into the pub, which was part of a storyline. That's one of the pictures we did for the inside. So we also created a little kind of 4-image double-page spread, which looked like this to go inside as part of the storyline. But then we sort of set up trying to do this cover image where, for various reasons, the androids were on a motorbike. Somebody was being kidnapped, in this case Ralph, with this big sack over his head, and then that was converted into the cover. While we were there, I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, that's. What also happened was there was Nigel, who was this Doctor Who lookalike. And let me see if I can I'll pull up this sort of slightly larger version of that. So Nigel here, he sort of goes along to comic festivals, does himself as a kind of David Tennant lookalike. He also has this wonderful remote control Dalek. So he's sort of walking around with his hands behind his back, and behind his back he's got the controller. And so this Dalek would sort of work its way up to the kids and say, "We will exterminate all the children," and all the kids would scream and run off or laugh or whatever. So a lovely kind of addition to it. So when we'd done that photo for the cover of the book, Sue then asked me if I would do a shot where we had the Dalek in as well, so we could use that for publicity shots. So we sort of shuffled everybody about. The Doctor Who and the Dalek came in, and stood next to the androids, and we ended up with this photo, which was then being used for sort of various bits of publicity. So that was the original plan. So we've got our androids, and the story. Essentially, the story of the book, like I say, so it's just a kind of 16-page short comic book. It was designed around the idea that these androids come into the comic festival and they start kidnapping various comic book writers and artists to take them off to a rival comic festival. But eventually they're stopped by them pesky kids. So it's just a lovely wee fun comic book. In order to get a picture of somebody being kidnapped, so we put Ralph into a bag and put him up here. But in one of the original panels, they ride into town on a motorbike, so hence somebody lent us a motorbike as well, and we got set up on that. So that's essentially the story behind the photo shoot. So that was a lot of fun. And what I will do in a moment, let me just close a couple of those. I'll take a quick look at the comments, and then I will talk you through how I edited that photo, because needless to say, it sort of has a very particular look to it. Right, okay, well, let's take a little look at the comments. Oh, Stacey says she saw the mug, very nice. Brian loves the mug. Sandra said the mug made her smile. And VG says the mug is brilliant. And Stacey says good afternoon to VG. Or well, where are we? Okay, sorry, yeah. Roy wants one, and VG saying good morning, Stacey, because it's actually midnight in India at the moment. Robert turned up and said howdy from Texas. Sorry for being late. Rosie says evening all, and Pat says wonderful sky. Is it for real? And that's referring to the picture. I will talk about that one in a minute. So, okay, so we've got a few more people in saying hello, and excuse me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just take you through the photo. So you saw in that little bit of video, we're at I was going to say town square, but it's not really a square, it's a triangle, and the village, the centre of the village where we took the photo. And so let me take you through here, and I'll show you. This is then the original photo. This is the one that I then started making. So what we've got here is we've got Doctor Who and his Dalek. We've got all the people set up. We've got Ralph with a sack over his head as though he's being kidnapped, and what have you. But as you can see, it doesn't have that glorious sky. That was something that I added in afterwards. The photo was of a real sky. It was a sky that I took a few years before over a loch where there was an incredible sunset and there was all these brilliant colours in the sky. So that was the sky I decided to add in on this occasion. But so what we started off with, though, is this is like, if you like, pretty much the raw file, or the original file. And so the next thing I needed to do was, immediately noticeable was the fact that the white sack was just sort of grabbing all the attention. So I needed to turn that brown. So I did that. The other thing that I'm doing here is the androids all had makeup on their faces, but their skin was just skin coloured. And so to make that more effective, what I did was I desaturated their skin to make their skin grey, and then that way the grey of the skin just blended in with the silver makeup on the faces. Actually, what I think I will do first, before I go any further with this, just to say that these androids, we spent a lot of time working out. They were stylized, and then back at the salon a few weeks before, several weeks before in fact, so that we could make up a set of reference images so people would know what to draw. And so we had the likes of, here we go with Connor. I've used Connor now on 2 or 3 different shoots. For those actually who remember the 7 Deadly Sins of Chocolate, Connor was Pride standing in the middle. So we had the makeup here where he's silver face, blue line of blue along the jaw, and then we've got him in leather jacket. So this was really designed just as a kind of a reference point so people would know how to draw him. This was the style. He was going to have that kind of style of hair, that kind of blue line, and he was going to be sort of wearing black. Then we had Grace, and Grace was having this sort of short red hair, sort of greenish line down the middle of her face, and you can see that, you know, I mean, well, they were basically all wearing black. Holly had these red stripes across her face, you know, quite an incredibly detailed plaited hairstyle. And you can see, you know, with a skirt and boots. And then Jess, who was also the makeup artist, she was having this sort of real curl in her hair and this sort of purple line going across the eye and down the nose. And that was the, you know, that again to give a sort of sense of how she was to look. So these were then sort of put into a document and sent out so that the artist would know what to draw. So here we can see them all. So what we've done then is, like I say, as well as turning that brown, I've then turned the skin grey in order to make sure that that ties in. Then I've used a little slight colour. I've got using a channel mixer here to boost the sort of yellows and blues, so that you notice the Dalek here then sort of starts to look much more bronze. The things like the house in the background here, which was sorry, not that one, sort of more kind of yellowish, sort of then takes on a sort of slightly more orange kind of hue. I've got one of the things actually I will just point out here as well is, if on the original photo you can see she's got a light behind her hair, and there's a bit of light hitting the side of his face, and Holly's side of Holly's hair as well, and is coming through behind the bike. And what I'd done was I'd set up an off-camera flash with an orange gel just behind them so that you were getting this light, because I realised that what I wanted to do, I wanted to have a backlight. And I had this idea originally of a kind of sunset background, but the weather wasn't going to allow us to do that directly. So I knew I would probably be putting a sky in afterwards. So I needed to have that light that was already coming in. It's much easier, it's much harder to fake that light in Photoshop than if you've already got a light to start with. So coming back to here then, so I've put on the brown thing, and then I sort of do this, which gives it a slight colour shift, which also means that the sky is going to blend in a little bit better. From there, I then sort of playing around with those who know, you know, sort of where I'm giving it a bit of a vignette, playing with the clarity tool, sharpening things up, tightening things to sort of give it more kind of depth, accentuating the kind of textures of it. Then I'm kind of going in and I start cleaning it up a bit. So we notice there's things like there's this label hanging off the sack that Ralph is under. We've got various bits of markings on the mudguard of the motorbike and things like that. And so I start cleaning some of these things up. So, you know, start removing them in Photoshop. Then we come on to the sky. So we've got this sky here, which is fairly dull, not particularly interesting. So I took a different sky and overlaid that using kind of different ways of blending modes. So this one I used multiply, this one I used screen, and then essentially I end up with this glorious colours. And I sort of moved the sky left and right until essentially the brightest part of the sky ended up behind Grace's head to echo the notion of the light, where you would expect that light to be hitting the side of Connor's face or behind Grace here, or catching the edge of Holly's face over there. So then I just sort of increased the contrast a little bit more, and then I sort of polished up the light that's coming through on the bike. If you look just down the base here, you can see I'm kind of accentuating that somewhat. Then I think I did a little bit more, yes, I did a little bit more cleaning up, realising that I'd forgotten about things like the stand the bike is on and a few kind of oil spots. So sort of went around, cleaned them up a bit. And then, so I thought I kind of had it there, and then I suddenly realised actually the windows were still reflecting a grey sky. So I went back in for a last thing with and I very gently just coloured the sky into the window panes as well, so that they appear to be reflecting the glorious colours in there. And that's where we ended up. So if I just undo those, we've gone from that to that. And I used exactly the same process on this one where we've got the cover, where we've just got the 4 androids, the motorbike and Ralph in a sack, where we don't have the Doctor Who and Dalek. Obviously designed differently because this had to be in portrait, whereas this was in landscape. And it was sort of designed in such a way that you could crop it in different ways if you needed to. I know I could make that, if we wanted, we could make it square, or I think quite often, quite a few times, it got used in a kind of banner type format as well. But actually, I think I used that one on the event page for setting up this podcast. So again, that idea, some of you may remember that sometimes I talk about the idea of take the photo bigger than you actually need it, stand back a little bit further, give a bit more space around it, and then that gives you more options to crop in depending on how you're going to use the image. And certainly when you're doing any kind of imagery for publicity, for magazines, for websites, or anything like that, where quite possibly somebody else is going to get their hands on the picture, so it might be getting handed over to a graphic designer or picture editor in order to be placed somewhere, then it helps them massively if you've given them the room to maneuver so they can crop it to fit the pages that they need it to fit. So I hope you found that interesting. It was a great fun shoot. A lot of organising, a lot of charging about, but I think it kind of paid off, and yeah, everybody kind of enjoyed themselves with that. So okay, I'll close that down and let's see if we've got any other comments. Oh, Sandra says, wow, quite a transformation. So Pat, as you can see, to answer you, the sky, like I say, it was a real sky, just not that particular sky. I just happened to add it in afterwards. Fiji says the photo was taken with a wide angle lens. Yes, it was. It was taken with my wide angle lens to make sure that I got in everything that I needed to, but also the other thing that you have with the wide angle lens is it creates, it sort of distorts the angles. It creates much more of a strong diagonals coming in, which I think add to that sort of sense of, well, dynamism really, considering that everybody's sort of it's a static image with everybody sitting there posed on the bike. You want to have that sense of movement, and having those strong diagonal lines coming down from the edges of the buildings leading you into the picture certainly help with that. And yes, the wide angle lens accentuates that. Right, okay. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say about Moniaive Comic Festival, unless anybody else has got any other questions that they want to throw in. Sandra says, you're fine now, but you were freezing for about 2 seconds before. Right. Okay, well, I'm rather glad that I'm at least seem to be back to normal now. Again, it gets particularly confusing for me because the little thumbnail video that's appearing on my screen next to the comments is, as always, somewhere between 10 and 15 seconds behind me as I'm presenting. Stacey says, I have the dilemma of getting a wide angle or getting a 600mm lens. Well, you can't get much more different than that. Essentially then, Stacey, that comes down to what you think you're going to be photographing more of, what you think you would have more fun with, what's going to be more useful. A wide angle is going to allow you to do landscapes, get you photographing in small confined spaces more easily. A 600mm lens is going to be able to allow you to zoom in and pick out detail at a distance. So that will be particularly good for things like wildlife photography, if you're wanting to take photos of birds that you can't get close to, for example, or you're wanting to take photos of the moon. Rosie has a 600mm lens, I think, and does a lot of wildlife photography with it. So yeah, they are so different lenses. It really comes down to, you need to think of which lens are you going to use more? Which one excites you more? Which do you think you could have more fun with? And if you can work that one out, then that will help you decide which lens to go for this time. And maybe in a few years' time, you've saved a few more pennies and you can get the other one. Okay, right, so VG says, I don't know if there is a buffer. What people are commenting, I am yet to see. Okay, so it might be that this sort of 10-15 second delay that I have is creating a bit of a buffer. So if it does freeze for me, at least it kind of carries on for you. And if it's not frozen for too long, then the image might not be too problematic. Okay, well, that's something then. Right, okay, so what are we going to do now then? Critique. That's what we're up to now. So we're now on to the critique section. So we've had 3 people send in images so far. So critique this is your opportunity to move from just generalized ideas of, well, you know, diagonals add movement, or rule of thirds helps you kind of create a slightly more interesting image than having things sitting in the middle of it, to how does it apply to your photo and that particular photo. Because a lot of the times we can understand the general rules and ideas and concepts, but then when we try to apply it to a particular photo that we're taking, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, or we can't see how it works. And at that point, being able to hand it over to somebody who's got a bit more experience can be really useful. So that's why I set up this corner of the internet, the critique section, for people to send in their images. So whether you've got questions about a particular image or a particular style of photography or a particular idea or concept, then let me know. If you haven't done already, there's a Facebook group called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Join that, and that's the place where you can stick your images in. For those of you who don't make Facebook Live, who maybe watch this on YouTube, the fact is I record all these images, I put them up on YouTube. You can see youtube.com/Kim Ayres. That's the place you can watch all the back episodes. This is episode 64, so you can watch episodes 1 to 63, plus a few selected bite-size aspects too, where I have talked about one aspect in particular. I've quite often taken that section out and put it into the bite-size section, so you don't have to scroll through all the podcast going, oh, where was that bit on diagonals? You can actually go to the bite size and find the section on that. So there's lots of useful things on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, make sure you subscribe. It's also, being youtube.com/Kim Ayres, quite easy to remember, quite easy to send to your friends. Let them know about it as well. Okay, so let's move on to the critique section. And the first image we're going to look at is Doriana. Doriana sent in, so she sent in this photo and she did a couple of edits on it as well. She did this and then she did a cropped right in close. what she said was, "Hi, I'm learning how to edit pictures and playing around with cropping and changing the curve to darken the image." So basically was just wanting to know, was she going along the right lines with that? And I think, first of all, so what we're talking about here is we've got a post-sunset image. The sun's just disappeared down. We've still got the glow in the sky. We've got the light catching the clouds. It's almost silhouette. Depending on the screen you're looking at, it might seem particularly black, but if I look down here, I can still see some detail in the rocks by the edge of the river, and some details in a little light catching a few of the branches. The question then is whether you want to have that detail in or not. So this is just an image that was posted in the group, lifted onto Facebook. So I won't have a huge amount of detail to pull out. But if I was, for example, to take the curves and turn it up like that, then you can see then that, you know, you've got the grass, got the trees, but of course you then blow out the sky completely. But that's the scene that we've got, where you can actually see the detail in the foreground, but you miss the background. However, what Doriana did next was she took the curves and she dragged, you see down in this bottom right corner here, she pulled it down. And what that's done is it darkens everything down, especially the kind of mid-range here, and it deepens the colours and makes much more of a silhouette out of this. Now, one of the things I would say with this, before we really kind of do much else, is it's always worth straightening the horizon a little bit. There's a sort of sense that it's just very slightly tilted up, and so what I would do, I'd just be very tempted to just curve that a little bit until we get that is now straight along there. And that just immediately sits a little bit better. So making sure that either depending on what you do, you certainly need, you either have a straight horizon, or if there are verticals in it, like a tower or a pole or something like that, it really needs to be upright. In this case, there are things like the telegraph pylon in the back, so that needs to be straight. Whereas when you had it before, it's very slightly tilted, but we put it up straight, and you combine that with a level horizon, and that immediately just makes it a slightly better photo. Then we can go to now the curves is one way of darkening things. Another way is if you've got it, is levels. Now levels work in a slightly different way. Here I can grab the darks and I can drag everything down. If I move that to the right, you see it makes everything darker. So it's quite similar to the curves. Or I can grab the mid-range and pull it down like that as well. They have slightly different effects. And where you really notice it, I think, is on the water. If you look at the reflection of the water, if I take the midtones down here, we're kind of making the water greyer. But if I take the darks down, it's darkening but it's kind of leaving the mid-range until we get much further down. So you can darken everything else here into silhouette before the water starts to go quite as quickly, and then that allows you to keep a certain level of red before it turns greyish with getting the darker. So that's another way of playing. It's always worth kind of exploring a couple of different ways to do it. The other thing that then is whether you want to play around with the crop more. Here you've got the sort of central line running through the middle. It feels like a sort of split of 50-50 in this. And I think quite often with images, you're better off having a kind of 60-40 or 30-70. You want to kind of have it a third of one and 2/3 of another, rather than necessarily having it sort of a split 50-50. Doesn't always work, but even things like in this case, as you've gone to silhouette, it means the foreground, there's a large black part here which we don't necessarily need all of. You could bring that up. You could lose the bottom part of this photo like that, and you haven't lost anything of the photo as such. You've still got the story of it. That's the really important bit, without it sort of dominating too much. Oh, that wasn't the one I wanted to press. So it also allows us to have a bit more of the sky. So you can do that. Maybe you can pull that in a little bit as well. And, you know, so you've kind of maybe just take that a fraction there. So you could do it that way, where you can kind of create a length of it. And we've got this sky is now playing the more dominant part. You could even maybe pull that up just a little bit more, something like that. And then do you see that there's a slightly different balance? When you've sort of got about 60% is the sky, then that creates a different kind of feel to it. Alternatively, if we go back to here, let's get those levels there again, is you bring that down, and then you kind of make it more about the river. And then the river is taking up the middle part of it. It still feels like there's probably too much dark there, so you can do something like that. And now it's not so much about the sky. Let's just zoom that in a bit. It's much more about the river and the reflections on it. Another option which you played with, which is certainly worth playing with, is the idea of making it slightly more landscape. Where you come here and you kind of pull that up. And now it's more about the width. Now, at this point, maybe you don't need so much of the base. If you really want to kind of pull that up, you could get rid of that foreground altogether. And it becomes much more about the sky and the reflection on the river. So you can see here that however you decide to crop it, you subtly change the story, the emphasis, what's being emphasized and what isn't. So I can see that you're already playing with the crops. That's brilliant. Like I say, they're always worth remembering that you want to get your horizontal, make sure your horizon is horizontal, unless you are deliberately going for very diagonal. Sometimes there are photos where you particularly want a diagonal horizon because you're making a particular kind of statement, and that's fine, you can do that, but you then need to make it obvious that's what you're doing. When it's just sort of half a degree or 1 degree out, all that kind of happens is it just looks slightly wrong. Sometimes an awful lot of photography is just getting the little bits right, just line up that bit, and it can make quite a bit of difference, because then what you don't want is people looking at the photo tilting their head and thinking why it's not looking right, rather than just actually enjoying the photo. I think another thing with this is, given that it is there is this sort of sense of the river and what have you, it would have been quite nice to sort of play with the image, turn the camera sideways. And while you're out there, if it's not costing you any more to take more than one photo. So, I mean, one of the crops you did was, you zoomed in on this, you darkened it down, and then you've cropped it to create that. But why not take that photo while you're there, where the quality of the image is going to be an awful lot better because you haven't had to lose most of the pixels in order to zoom in on it. So I think it's always worth it that if you're doing landscapes, if you're taking photos with your phone or your camera, try other ratios, turn it sideways and, shoot left and right, shoot up and down, turn it, try it. Never take just the one photo, take half a dozen, take a dozen, take 3 dozen, and change the angles and change, whether you're portrait or landscape. And bit by bit, when you do that, you will start to get a feel for what you think, oh, that's working, or no, that isn't. And why is this working rather than that? And essentially, whilst for certain I'm here to give you advice and ideas and pointers, most of your learning is going to come through doing. So your photography will improve the more you do it, and the more you start to get a feel for what's working and what isn't. There's I can't remember which famous photographer said something like, your first 10,000 photos, your worst. Now, on the one hand, that can feel like a sort of terrible sense of, oh God, am I not going to get any good for another 10,000 photos? That's terrible. But on the other hand, I always like it because it kind of lets you off the hook a bit. What you have to remember is you're not going to get perfect photos every time. And I've taken many more than 10,000 photos. Probably hundreds of thousands of photos, but I still will take a lot of photos in order to get the one that I want. We live in a digital age. We're not restricted by that. We've only got 24 or 36 images on the film, and once we've used that up, we've got to go and take it off somewhere to get it developed, and it's going to cost us so much. If you're using your phone or you're using a digital camera, you can take as many photos as you like and just delete the ones that were out of focus and just didn't work, and something got in the way, or your hand was across it, or you left the lens cap on, or anything like that. So when you're at a scene, just take more photos. So I think you made a good start. You're getting the right idea. The amount you want to change these levels, I mean, I've sort of stopped at this point. You sort of went further down and made it much deeper red than that. I think part of the problem with that is we're starting to lose the river here. That's just getting a little bit too dark on what your crop was. So I'm tempted to sort of come back and just sort of play it slightly more subtly. But again, there's a notion, it's kind of up to you as to how far you want to move those sliders. Again, play. You'll have a sense of, I like that, oh, I don't like that, I feel I've gone a bit too far. In which case, move it back again. And as I say, playing with it is the way that you will learn the most. But I think it's fun, fun photo, good for you for noticing it, those lovely kind of colourful skies. And if you're going to play with silhouettes, like we were talking about last week, all the silhouette photography, then this is a great start. So anyway, I hope that was useful, Doriana. Okay, so let's close that. What have we got? Oh, looks like there's a bit of a debate going on over Stacey's. Stacey says, "I love landscape, but lately getting birds, but not much." That's why I was debating. Well, certainly, if you've got a wide-angle lens, you won't be able to pick out birds because they will just appear even smaller in the picture. Jim is recommending you get a kind of all-purpose lens, one of these sort of that goes from 18mm to 200mm, and it sort of will do a lot of things in between. The advantage of these kind of lenses is they are very flexible. The quality will never be quite as good as a prime lens or a more expensive lens, but then unless you're blowing these pictures up because you are selling them and you're expecting them to be, you are being a professional photographer and you're expecting these to be, made into A0 size posters, sort of just put on billboards, then I wouldn't worry about it quite so much. So it might be a case, as Jim suggests, that you get one of these slightly more flexible lenses which allows you to get in close or to do wide angle. But a bit also depends on your budget as well. Rosie says she probably takes 600 or more photos each time, and she's trying to capture a subject, and I usually find between 1 and a dozen that work. Yeah, I've known that. Yeah, Rosie says it doesn't take long to take 10,000 photos. It's true, that notion, but yes, your first 10,000 photos are your worst was quoted back in the days when it was film, if it wasn't even glass plate, where taking 10,000 photos could easily take you a decade to do, whereas now you just hold your finger down on high speed. It's true, 10,000 photos won't improve your photography as much as 10,000 would in the old analog days, but it's just that notion that it basically is about it takes a lot. Keep doing it, keep practicing, and the more you do it, the better you get, and that's really what we're referring to. VG says it's a bit hard to delete the 300 odd photos there, where there's not much difference. Oh, Stacey says she has a Tamron 18 to 300 millimeter lens. All right, okay, so you've already got that flexible kind of lens, but 18 to 300 is giving you quite a big range. The 600 will essentially get you in twice as close as the 300. A wide angle will then works at the other end, depending on how wide you go. My wide angle lens is a 10 to 22, so most of that sitting before your 18mm starting point. Okay, right. So let's move on then. Vandana next. So Vandana put up this photo of Swan, but it felt kind of very quite it's something to do with the editing here is kind of almost kind of quite noisy in a way. It's sort of accentuated the edges. I don't know quite how the editing was done with that. However, she then went and redid it and turned it. No, not that one. Where have we gone? I seem to have lost that photo. So let's start that one again. Click here, and yes, created this out of it, which actually I think is a much nicer image for the swan. So, and then it says, I worked on this picture of a swan. I added more space and made the background more smooth. Any other edits, if you can suggest, would be welcome. And certainly, Vandana, I think you definitely improved the image considerably from, where are we? From that to that. This now feels much more in keeping with it. It feels softer. This feels very harsh. This feels softer. You have given it more room to breathe. Something with the editing software feels slightly out. The posts don't seem to quite line up right. This will presumably be the equivalent to whether, I don't know whether you're using Photoshop or you're using some other editing software, which is creating an auto content fill. So if I open that in Photoshop, just close Doriana's there, then what we can see here is that it's sort of filling in the gaps for you. This line here doesn't quite look right. This looks a little bit odd. You could maybe touch that up depending on the fill situation you've got. I'd say use a patch tool, maybe pull that up like that. Not totally sure that that's worked either, but there are bits here where it's not fully working in the way that you necessarily want it to. Let's try something like that. But you can play around a little bit more to just try and sort of make it look a little bit more like it's slightly more natural than it is. It is always one of these problems that when you do an auto thing, it doesn't always necessarily line up, but just making something like that makes it look slightly better, I think. The other things with this, now something you can't do quite so easily in Photoshop would have been slightly nicer. I think there's a point here whereby you, in an ideal situation, I think you want the swan looking more into the picture than out of it, because especially because the swan is already slightly to the right of the center. The fact that it's then looking off to the right as well makes most of the space to the left feel a bit superfluous, and that's where you've actually added on your picture. You've added more to the left of it, but it now feels like there's a lot of space. If that swan had essentially been facing the other way, it would have felt a little bit more. Now, I don't know whether this will be possible. Let's just actually try this. Maybe I should have tried this before, but if I copy that, paste that, and then edit, this will just be a very rough thing to sort of see what it looks like, and yeah, transform, flip that horizontally. Yeah. So the background obviously isn't quite lining up, but the fact that you can see here that just the notion of the swan looking back in towards the picture works out a little bit better. It feels like there's a lot of room at the top you probably don't need. Again, you kind of pull that down, thinking that sort of roughly sort of rule of thirds, where your swan is appearing in the sort of upper right of the center. You can even pull this over a little bit, something like that. And there you see, I think the balance of it works much more nicely. So now what you have is you have the sort of swan looking back into the picture, whereas when it's looking out, the balance just doesn't quite feel right. Now, obviously, that's not something. The big problem when you're there taking the photo is that the swan is doing what the swan is going to do. It's not necessarily going to. But part of that, then, with all wildlife photography, is being patient, setting yourself up, waiting for the right set of circumstances, taking a few photos as you can grab them, but then staying around and watching and seeing if the swan then turns, take the lead from the direction the bird is pointing. The other thing, just as I was saying to Doriana just now, was the idea of, consider the idea of landscape photos. Judging by your original photo that you this one here, it's a very long photo, so I'm assuming you're using your phone with this. So I've got a funny feeling you said that most of your photography is done with a phone. Phones, you get into the habit of doing these very kind of, accentuated portrait things, and I think, a lot of the time these will work an awful lot better if you just turn your phone sideways. Go landscape, because a ratio like that works much better if it's sort of cinematic, really. It can give you a really nice cinematic feel that way round. But the upright ratio, I don't think tends to work quite as well. You can do it. If you know what you're doing, you can find the right kind of subject matter for it. But this sort of feels more like a bookmark than an image from a cinema screen. And that's a particular kind of style of doing photography. And I think if you're wanting to get out there and explore, and certainly if you're wanting to do nature landscape, you're wanting to do wildlife in the park, you're wanting to do landscapes, then learn to shoot landscape with your phone. Just turn it 90 degrees and play around with it. And of course, obviously, try and make sure the horizon is straight in those cases. But I think there's a lot more to play with that. But certainly, I think your re-edit of this was a good way to go. Because it feels softer, and the swan is quite soft. That last edit felt very harsh, but just that notion of think about in terms of the direction that really, it's like if you are taking a photo of somebody riding a bicycle, or somebody walking along. Generally speaking, you want to have more space in front of them than you do behind. And I'm probably going to talk a little bit about this actually when I come on to the next photo of Robert's. So stick around, because some of the things I'm going to talk about in Robert's photo would also apply to yours. So I hope you find that useful, Vandana. Thank you for sending your image in. Right, let me close that and close that, and we'll come back. So, Vandana says, yes, I did. So I presume that's referring to the autofill software that you use. Right, okay. What next? Yes, I showed you the mug already, didn't I? Good. Oh, all right. Okay, so I think Vandana has found that useful, according to the comments. So good. I'm glad about that. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to come on to the final image of tonight, which is Robert. Now, some of you may remember a few months ago, Robert sent in a picture. Robert's got this wonderful sports car, and he's rather captivated with this idea of capturing an image where it's reflected in a puddle and then flipping the image upside down so that the reflection appears to be the original and then the original is the reflection. So it's a particular style. I remember when he sent in an image once before, he talked about it. It's something he's been trying to perfect, and anyway, so he sent in another version of this, new updated version, and this is Robert's car. And as you can see, what's happened is it's already flipped. If I just turn that way, you can now see the car the right way up and the reflection underneath. But this is the way round that he wants to have it. And what Robert said was, I took a picture of this car back in the winter trying to achieve the mirror effect. I'm now, and that was the one we looked at before, I'm now trying to improve on the concept, but I'm not so certain that it's executed very well. The image is flipped so the reflection is on top. This is an experiment in perception. And the whole idea is that what he's trying to do is create an image whereby you look at it and you think you know what you're seeing, but it doesn't quite feel right. So then you have to look closer, and that's the point where you kind of then realise that it's the reflection is the wrong way around. He goes on to say, I like how the clouds look darker on the top and the clear sky is on the bottom. This was not planned and no changes were made to enhance that. I'm considering working on a colour enhancement for the bottom to emphasise the blue, because basically the sky has just whitened out in the original. Let me know what you think and how I can improve it. I think of it as I think it's a work in progress. And then actually in the comments, Akshat Gupta said, flipped vertical, it looks a bit like a Christmas tree. Oh, which I think he was, hold on, gone too far there. That one. Well, I think he was talking about that, which I can kind of see where you're coming from, but as he admits, is not necessarily particularly helpful in this case. So let's open this with Photoshop and start thinking about what you can do to try and tidy this up, because part of the problem we have here, Robert, is the fact that the reflection, which is now on top, so it's the bit that we're looking at first, isn't as clear as the actual original is very sharp. The reflection, being a reflection in a puddle, is never going to be quite as sharp as the original, so it doesn't quite look right in that. So I think what Robert's done here is he sent me the original image, so we can play around with it. And the first thing I would do is just what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is I would straighten this horizon. This line that runs through the middle of the car and its reflection, I think what we will do is we'll just make sure that that's straight. I think that automatically helps. And then the other thing I'd be tempted to do, because of the style of photo that you're doing, is it does kind of feel like it's unbalanced. There's too much on one side. And this is, if we're going for mirror reflection, let's go for mirror reflection and have this pretty much balanced. So you've got the same amount of picture either side. And this little bit here, so let's maybe take that up there a little bit, down a little bit here. So the lines are just hitting the wheels on either edge here. Crop that, take a quick look. Probably don't need quite as much space behind it, so we'll just pull in a little bit here, something like that. And maybe I've gone just a little bit too far there, but I think perhaps there. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. But what we've got here is that I realised the crop there, I didn't have it on autofill, so I will just patch up that little corner just down there. So we're starting off with this, and now I think immediately just sort of straightening that and making that image flip looks slightly more interesting. It's sort of starting to grab us, because the whole story, the real story of this image is that notion of the even reflection. And so I think that's kind of our starting point. Now I'm just going to duplicate the layer there. So what else can we do? Well, I think one of the first things we really kind of want to do is maybe tighten it up and sharpen this a little bit up a bit if we can. So if I go to filter, camera raw filter, and if I hit auto, what does that do? Well, that automatically kind of helps it brings a little bit out of the shadows, and it also tones down the highlights a little bit. But I think what we also want to do is maybe if I take the texture, sharpen that a little bit, and maybe the clarity, something like that. We could even, if we wanted, take a little bit of a vignette on it. There's already a little bit there, but we can kind of accentuate that a little bit. Come back to the basic, where was I? So take the clarity up a little bit, something like that. And now it pops a little bit more. One of the other problems we've got here as well is actually the colour red, the reflected red is a duller red than the red that's underneath. However, one of the things I just wanted to sort of play with and draw your attention to here as well, Robert, is one of the things I remember from your previous thing is that you also have, you've got two versions of this car. You've got a black version as well as a red version, unless you've already sold one of them. And I remember what you did before was you wanted I think you had the reflection as the black before, but what I'm going to do here is, because the top one is the one that's not quite so clear, I thought maybe if we made a black version of the car on the top. So in that case, if we go to the channels which we've played around. I mean, okay, let's go back here. I mean, if I just go to hue saturation, because I realise I'm making leaps here. If I desaturate that, then this red car essentially becomes grey. But you've got a black version. So another way of doing this is if we go to the channels, if we split that, the red channel makes the reds brighter, so that becomes pale, almost white. But the green channel makes it darker, and the blue channel kind of makes it slightly darker again. So if we take that blue channel, now I'm going to select all, copy that, come back and paste it here. I'm going to set a mask, so we go back to here, and then essentially I can paint this back in. Or what I might do is just, let's do a quick mask. This is probably a quicker and easier way of doing it. And now if I come back to here and paint in that, and then what you can see is it's not quite done it on the edges, so I'll just very briefly and quickly, it doesn't matter, it's not absolutely exact, I'm not going to spend hours on this. What we're just trying to do is give you a sense of what's going on. Wait a minute, leave that little bit of blue in the window there, just, in fact actually, let's just take that out so that we've got a little bit of colour there. So now, if you want, you've now got that kind of idea where you've got the black car on top and the red car reflected underneath. What you could also do, if you wanted to really, is if we actually just take that top part, I'm going to copy and paste that, oh, no, wrong one. Let's tell you what, let's select all, copy and paste. Let's create a version of this, come back here so I can just copy the top part and then just edit that top part a little bit more so it's not editing the whole picture because the bottom is already sharp enough. And then what we can do with this is, again, use a little bit more texture, a little bit more clarity perhaps, just to make it slightly sharper. Now it's never going to be as sharp as the original because it is a reflection, but you can see that what we have done is sharpened it up from what there was before. And I think at this point then, Robert, we've kind of got something looking a little bit more interesting, a little bit more kind of where you are getting that sense of, we've now got the black car on top, we've got the reflected red car underneath, which I think was something you were certainly chasing before. And if we compare that to the original, that, you know, where this is much hazier, we kind of cropped in, and what we're trying to do here is emphasize the story points that you're interested in, which is this notion primarily of the reflection. Now, there is another thing that I want to add on here, Robert, which is the notion of the sky. You talked about maybe adding a bit more blue to the sky, trying to do something else with it. Now, relatively recently, Photoshop has added in a new option called Replace Sky or Edit Sky or something like that. So what I would like to do is sort of show you how that works. So what I'm going to do is, I've just created a new version up here. And if I go up to the Edit tool, down here, there's now an option called Sky Replacement. And I'm going to click on that. And what we can do is we can go off and we can find a bunch of skies. So I can find blue skies, bright blue, cloudy skies, we can get sunset skies. Now, just to go back to the sky that I used in the Moniaive Comic Festival thing, that was one of my own, and I had to do it all manually. It didn't have Replace Sky as an option at that point, so that would have certainly been handier. But you can see here that what we have is a whole bunch of options of creating some amazing skies, outrageous skies, but you also have to kind of be slightly careful because it doesn't necessarily do it exact. And you might notice in the background here, where the trees are overlapping, it's not necessarily that convincing. And if you go for too dark a sky, you're going to really notice it. So you're trying to create a sympathetic sky. So actually, I think if we go back up to, let's sort of play around. Where did we have one? It's a kind of soft, I mean, or even something like that. Yes, you see this one, that's I think works quite nicely. And it's a fairly, so if I click that and then I'll just OK there. And you can see we've now got that sky in there. And it's placed it at the top, but it's assuming the bottom hasn't a part of it. So obviously what we now need to do is essentially do the same thing on the other side. So if I image rotation, flip vertical, and then what we'll do is we'll put the same sky in here again. So I go to Edit, Sky Replacement, and we're already on the same sky because it's on the same one that it was using last time. So we'll just wait for that to catch up. In goes the sky, and it places it in the same way. So now we've got that. That's the right way around, but of course we wanted the image rotation. So we go back to flip vertical, and there we go. So now we've got a more interesting background. We've got that interesting sky. We've got the reflection, not just of the trees, but the reflection of the texture of the sky as well. And I think all in all, for the kind of photo you were talking to me about, what you were aiming to get, I think this probably feels further along the road of where you were trying to get to than where you started out. So I hope that helps, Robert. I hope that gives you some ideas to play with. You know, certainly that replace sky option, I think if you're playing with puddles and you've got, and it really helps where you've got quite a neutral sky. Because you've already got there's not a lot of colour and texture in it, the replace sky works that little bit better. But always try and find a sky that is sympathetic to the image you're using. I keep seeing in a lot of online photo competitions, and even people sort of putting stuff onto Instagram, where they've used, whether it's Photoshop's replace sky or just there are a lot of little programs you can buy which have replace sky options to put on filter, and they use skies which are not sympathetic to the picture itself. And sometimes they've used a completely wrong color scheme. So, you know, just the color of the sky doesn't seem to match and work or feel in rhythm with the foreground. And very often what's not done as well, which I tend to get sort of, I find myself getting irritated by, is you will have something like, you'll have the hills and you'll have this dramatic sunset behind the, and you'll see the sun in the sky, but then the shadows in the foreground are going in the wrong direction. Because the sky's been replaced, the shadows don't match up with the direction of the light source, and that just looks wrong. So understand that if you are replacing anything within the picture, that it has to be as sympathetic as possible. Because to go right back to one of the things I was talking with Van Danner about, and I've talked about on many occasions, is that you have to make sure that you are looking at, people who are looking at the photo are looking at the photo. They're not necessarily looking at the edit, unless that's what you're trying to draw their attention to. In this case, you are drawing attention to the fact that the reflection isn't the same as the car that's above it. Certainly by changing the colour of the car, that's made that even more so. But I think it would still work if you had the original red as well. But you don't want them thinking, well, hang on a sec, the colours of the sky don't really match with the trees, and everything looks wrong. So always, if replacing the sky, keep that in mind. So I hope that was useful. I hope you found that useful. Thanks for sending that image in. It was quite fun playing around with that to see if I could see what I could maybe do with it. Right, where are we? Got a few more comments come in. Robert says, definitely still a work in progress. I have 600 plus other photos to work on. Well, I don't think you have to work on all 600 of them. Just pick out the best. Robert says still have both cars, and right, I was saying many thanks, and this is definitely what he wants to do with it. That's good. Stacey says, much better. The sky replacement I never knew was there. Thank you for showing and how to change. Yeah, it's very recent. I didn't even realise it was. I kind of stumbled across it by accident. I think it was somebody advertising their course on my Instagram feed said, use the new sky replacement, and I wasn't quite sure what that was, so I went and Googled it, and lo and behold, Photoshop is doing all sorts of things all the time. Always worth kind of keeping up a bit. Sandra says, what a transformation. I like the 2 different colours for the cars. Jim says the replacement sky makes a big improvement. Rosie says the sky replacement tool is fabulous. Unfortunately, it's not available in Photoshop Elements. You have to get by the big version for that. And Stacey says, I somewhat agree with you, making your own sky to replace. Yeah, I mean, you can do that. I not been into that, but I think you can just as easily, rather than use one of their skies, you can use one of your own skies. And in an ideal situation, I would definitely say do that. There is something that feels to me slightly wrong using somebody else's photo, even if it is royalty free and you're allowed to use it. I prefer to feel that if I'm doing some kind of composite, that I have taken all the elements of that photo. Part of it is certainly is something you should kind of get into a habit of, so you never have to worry about copyright. But I also think it's good form. I think it's good practice. I think it's just more satisfying to know that every element in that photo is something you took. You're a photographer, after all. You do photography because that's what you like doing. Slightly different if you're a graphic designer and you are on a deadline and you don't have time to go out and take photos of your own sky, and it's royalty free and you can use it and it's going to do the job. That's fine. But you, yes, you who's watching this, you're a photographer, or photography at the very least is your passion and that's what you're pursuing. So take your own skies. Have a folder on your computer called Interesting Skies, and then every time you take a photo where you go, that's a lovely sky, maybe I can use that in the future, drop a copy of it into your Interesting Sky folder. Who knows, maybe you'll have folders of interesting blue skies, interesting sunsets, interesting skies with a little bit of pink in them, skies with birds flying across, skies with funny shaped clouds. But yes, having your own library of images I think is infinitely preferable to swiping somebody else's, royalty free or not. And certainly if you are going to use somebody else's, you should always, if it's not royalty free and you paid for it, certainly get permission. Right, okay. What else have we got there? VG says this is amazing capture. Reflection captured well. I turned my phone upside down to see that. And Stacey says that's why I would rather use it something I took. Yes, I have a skies but no folder. Yeah, the skies folder, it always does make it easier to find them again in the future. Right, that's pretty much us. If you've enjoyed this, if you find this useful, if you would like to support these podcasts, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Always appreciated. Not compulsory, but definitely appreciated. And the other thing is invite your friends. Bring a few more people along to the party. The more people we have involved with this, the more interesting photos we get, the more we can learn. So do have a think about people you know who are interested in photography, who you think might benefit from this podcast. If everybody managed to just invite one person along, we've instantly doubled the number of viewers and people taking part. So that's us. Next week, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to be doing, but also don't forget to use the group a bit more. We have the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. You can put images in, certainly put images in for next week's critique. Anything you feel that you would like some help on, put it in. But actually, if you just want to get a little bit of feedback from some of your peers as well, you can say in the comments when you put your put up your picture and say, I'm interested in what anybody else has to say on this, always looking for feedback. And likewise, if you see somebody's put an image in and is asking for feedback from anyone, try and give them a bit of feedback. Have a think about. I think there's something really good about learning how to critique other images. Fine, it's lovely to say that's a great photo and it's good for the ego, but it doesn't actually help somebody advance. So tactfully, kindly, there's never any excuse for being nasty about it. If somebody's put their image out there, they are exposing themselves to, it can kind of feel a bit risky. You don't want to. We all fear ridicule. So if somebody does put that picture up and asks for help, never. Bad behaviour or just being nasty about it will not be tolerated. People will be instantly banned from the group for that. But having said that, I don't think any of you are ever likely to do that, so I'm not overly worried about that. But yeah, if somebody puts in an image for critique and they say, I'm open to suggestions from anybody, then have a go, have a think about how would you set about improving that image if you had it, and make suggestions. But certainly put your pictures in and I will look at them next week for critique. Also, if there's anything that you would like for me to go over, is there a particular technique or aspect of photography that you would like more information on, either because you've not seen me do it before, or I last did it a year ago and you've forgotten, or you weren't about, or you would just like a different take on it or some reinforcement, then again, use the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group to let me know. If by any chance you are watching this on YouTube and you don't do Facebook, email me. You can do the same thing. Okay, that's it. Last few comments here. A few people saying, right, so Stacey says, always a pleasure. Have a wonderful week. Jim saying, thanks again. Roy saying, thanks, Tim, for another informative evening. And I think you called me Tim earlier as well. I'm hoping that it's just an auto correct. It's try Kim rather than Tim. Rosie says, thanks, Kim. Be away next week, but we'll catch up on YouTube. And VG says, thanks too. I'm watching it live, or am I behind? Good night, everyone. And Bandana says, taking pictures of cobwebs, please. Oh, there's an interesting one. Okay, put your ideas into the group and I will kind of review them there. Thank you ever so much for your time, for your energy, for sticking around, for sending your images in. And I will see you all next week. Right, take care. Bye-bye.